Hello and welcome to the Soul Shaking Love podcast. I'm your host, Valerie Green from coachvaleriegreen.com. And today I am really excited to be interviewing Jem Fuller, who is both a leadership coach and a retreat facilitator. And we're going to talk about conscious communication and why that's so important. So, hello, Jem. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Valerie, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yes. And of course, this podcast is dedicated to bringing you the expert teachers to feel that mind, body, and spirit connection with both yourself and your true love. So, conscious communication is, of course, a big part of that. So, I will talk a little bit more about Jem, and then, of course, we'll dive into the topic because it's really about how to elevate our relationships and experience of life and love through learning these principles of conscious communication, which have certainly transformed my life. So I look forward to helping you learn with Jem's wonderful teachings. So Jem is the author of the award-winning book, The Art of Conscious Communication. So I'm going to paste the link to that below this interview if you want to learn more. And he also has a TED Talk about it. So I will paste the link as well. He has several TED Talks, so I'll post the most recent one. And he's lived such a colorful global life that I encourage you to read more about his bio below. He's a dedicated partner and father. He loves both surfing and meditation, which is what his free gift is about, the meditation part, not the surfing part. That maybe he can teach you in privately if you get close to him. But basically what he does now for over 12 years is that he runs his own executive leadership coaching practice where he teaches this to businesses. And he also runs an international retreat company in the Himalaya, Bali, and Australia. So, of course, you can learn more about that on his website, which we'll post below as well. But today we're really going to be focusing on the communication piece. So, I really want to just learn more. First of all, Jem, what is it that started you on your journey? Why you needed to learn conscious communication?
Yeah, it's a great question to start with, Valerie. And, I've been looking forward to coming and having a chat with you, specifically in terms of how conscious communication relates to what I believe is the most fundamental and important relationship outside of our relationship with self, which is where it all begins, obviously, but then with your romantic partner. And we can talk more about that in a sec. But when I first started becoming curious about communication and conscious communication was when I noticed that in my previous marriage, the one that is no more, but also the marriage that brought my two beautiful sons into the world. So with my then wife, who's the mother of my children, I would notice that in communication with her, I would start to become terrible in communication. And she would say that to me, "You're a terrible communicator." And then I'd notice that at work in my leadership role, I was actually a pretty good communicator. I could communicate with my teams and my people, and I could one-to-one or one-to-many stand up in front of a room and inspire people and get people on board. But then I'd go home with my then wife, and in a moment where it became important to me or emotional, and there was the key, I would start to trip over my own thinking and stumble over my words and feel like a fool in communication. And so I would withdraw because I didn't want the conflict or the challenge of it. And in our relationship, she started to say to me, "You're an island. Where are you? You feel really distant." And she
Mm.
was right. I had become an island because I felt like I'm almost feeling stuck to express it in this moment right now. I felt stuck in the communication. It wasn't flowing.
Mm.
And so after that relationship and with lots of reflection, because at the end of that relationship, it was also other big parts of my life all coming to their natural end, which was what people call your midlife crisis in my early 40s, 13 or 14 years ago. For me, it was a midlife awakening. It was a real kind of coming to the next level of my own consciousness. And in the reflection of the chapters previous, I started to understand really how communication and conscious communication is a fundamental piece of the quality of our life. because our ability to communicate underpins our ability to be effective in everything that we do, but most importantly in our relationships. And we exist in relationship with self and with the world around us, and on a personal level with people. That's where we actually exist. And the quality of our communication determines the quality of our relationships, and the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our life. So
Mm-hmm.
how good is your life is really directly correlated to how good are your relationships. So I became really fascinated in this, and so then my coaching, my leadership coaching, kept coming back to communication a lot. And then when the pandemic came about and we all were forced to stay inside, I started writing that first book, The Art of Conscious Communication, because I thought really I wanted to explore not only how fundamentally important is it, but what can we do on a practical, implementable level? What can we practice on a day-to-day basis that helps us make those relationships more conscious in communication?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with you that it is so important. And especially, when we get triggered in a romantic relationship, it is so hard to not withdraw when we're overwhelmed. It's very
Yeah,
common. Uh,
yeah.
so yeah, I mean, so tell us more then about conscious communication. Like, you know, um, tell us more about, what you've discovered about it.
Mm. Well, I mean, communication, when we strip it back to the fundamental and original definition of communication, communication comes from the Latin noun communicatio, which is a sharing, not a telling, it's a sharing.
Mm-hmm.
And the verb communicare, which is to make common. So obviously the root of the word communication is common. Like what do we have in common? A commune, a community, you know, and yes. So just to be aware that communication is not me telling you something, it's me sharing something with you, and vice versa, and hopefully coming to an understanding, which doesn't mean we always need to agree, but ideally that we understand each other. Okay. And so then the more conscious we are of anything, the more aware we are of it. So when we're not conscious of something, we're not aware of it. The more conscious we are, the more aware we are. So I've been curious about how do we become more conscious in communication. So when you and I are in communication together, what can I do to practice being more aware, not only of myself, but also more aware of you and more aware of us, the collective? And what is the actual purpose of this communication, the higher purpose, for the greater good? How can this communication benefit the greater good, not just the individuals involved? And there are ways to practice becoming more conscious, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's the general premise of the term conscious communication.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. Because a lot of times people talk and they want to be heard, but they're not considering how it lands with the other person.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you
And
know,
we think we've been understood because I communicated in a way that makes sense to me. So how could you have not understood what I said? Though I said it in the most clear way. And I said to you, 1 + 1 = 2. So then we get confused when the other person walks away and they heard 1 × 3 = 3 or
right.
something, you know.
Right, which
Um,
is also true, but completely different than what you said.
yeah,
And so
that's right.
then it's like it's a good example, metaphorically, because they heard something true. So it must have been what you said. And then it's a complete misunderstanding. Um,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
they believed that you were talking about one thing and you're actually talking about something else. And then later you'll probably argue about it because she would be like, well, why didn't you do the thing we agreed? Well, I did. No, you didn't. And then because it was just a misunderstanding.
Yeah, and also the more conscious we are in the communication, then we can seek to understand beyond the words that are being shared. And this is such a common mistake that's made in relationships when we have masculine and feminine energy in a relationship. regardless of the gender equation, regardless of who's male or female or anything. This is just the masculine and feminine energy styles
Yep.
that communicate necessarily in very different ways. So the masculine energy is literal. When the masculine energy says, I am okay, the masculine means literally okay, not great, not bad, just literally okay. But when the feminine speaks, I'll say she, but insert whatever pronoun you want. But when the feminine speaks, she speaks emotionally and expansively and literally, and not literally, laterally and expressively and in code quite often because she's giving the masculine the opportunity to seek to understand what she really means. So
Yep.
when the feminine says, I'm fine, the masculine hears fine and thinks there's no problem, but the feminine might not be fine.
Yep.
She might be in a world of pain, but she says, I'm fine because she wants to see if you really care. And you
Exactly.
lean in and say, really? Are you sure you're fine? How did like, how much do you care about me? So the words are not necessarily what they appear to be. And so being more conscious of these human dynamics and the matrix and the code of human behavior, I find fascinating, but also really useful because in a moment where the masculine might take the feminine literally, when she says, you never do anything for me, and the masculine hears, I never do anything for you, and then gets upset and goes down into being a boy and starts to stomp their feet, going, I do things for you all the time and I feel unappreciated, and now we're fighting.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
When actually what she meant was she didn't mean never. She meant in this moment right now, I feel like you're not helping me. In this moment, this is how I'm feeling. And the more evolved masculine or conscious masculine can hear that and lean in and say, wow, this is how you're feeling right now. Let me seek to understand. Let me stay still in this moment and present for you. Let's communicate, right? So that's more conscious communication.
Yeah, exactly. You've just said a lot, and I completely agree with you. I'm smiling because um I mean, I do that to my husband too. I don't say I'm fine when I'm not, but it's like, I'm very, very feminine and so I sometimes I just say things, and I think he's understanding me, but it's not literal and you know.
Yeah,
So, yep. I mean,
yeah,
I think most feminine energy women can relate to that.
yeah.
And so I was actually, literally wearing a sign on my forehead that said, interpret everything as just feelings and needs for a while.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I wrote that on a headband and walked around like that.
Yeah, I love it.
Like, what do I gotta do? Put a sign on my forehead?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Literally did.
um, because yeah, we were just having all these misunderstandings because it was just a time in our lives when we were changing a lot and we were sleep deprived. And I'm just like,
Yeah,
don't believe my words literally. I'm trying to express a feeling. If it sounds like I'm trying to express anything else, it's a feeling. So it's
yeah,
like that's the way
yeah,
feminine energy women talk. And I agree, they want their masculine energy partner, assuming that they're with one, to drop and hear the emotional message underneath, not to take the words literally.
yeah, yeah.
And
Which isn't easy for a lot of masculine energy men, especially men of my generation who grew up in America or Australia, and the generation above us was toughen up, harden up, suck it up, don't cry like a girl, I used to get told. Can you imagine that? Wow. I've got two sons who are 21 and 19, and they cry when they feel the emotion of expression in that ends up in tears. The tears flow. But for me
Mhm.
growing up, it was shunned and not even only shunned, but I was made to feel ashamed or there was something wrong with me. And I was a very emotional boy. Um, and I understand it. My dad was brought up in post-World War II, and it was tough times, and there was no time to be emotional. There was no time to meditate and reflect. You had to get up and work hard to survive,
Mhm.
and there was no space for emotions. So I understand where it's come from, But the result of that is that we have generations of men who have got no idea how to even ascertain how they're feeling, let alone communicate it. And so we go from zero emotions, just non-emotional, and then all of a sudden a switch flips and we're at 100 degrees of rage,
Yeah.
you know. And I believe that this actually, and this is a pretty important subject, I think this is part of the reason that domestic violence is so rampant, because we've got men who don't know how to engage with their emotional states before they become rage and express them and say, hey, I'm feeling a bit annoyed right now, or I'm feeling useless right now, or I'm feeling vulnerable, or I'm whatever it is. They just are on this level of no emotion. And then all of a sudden, combine that with alcohol or whatever else happens, and we have these horrible rates of domestic violence.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't want to gloss it over. I think it's caused by many, many, many problems besides that. But of course, I agree with you that a lot of men go 0 to 60 to anger because they don't know how to feel the other feelings in between. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that is something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I
So,
suggest in my book there's suggestions for men on how to start to explore their emotional worlds.
oh, good.
Yeah, I mean I can share a um, very quick takeaway here, in
Yeah.
case any of your listeners want to practice it. So I start by saying, how about you just dedicate some time to sit on your own in contemplation. And if you have a family, let your family know what you're doing, because that's beneficial. One, they'll give you the space to do it, but two, your children learn from you. And if you said to your family, hey, I've decided that I want to get more in touch with myself and my emotional world. So every Sunday afternoon, after lunch, I'm just going to go and sit out in the garden under the tree, and I'm just going to sit for 15 minutes on my own. And the reason I'm doing it is because I'm just going to start to become curious about how I'm feeling. That's all. And your family, I'm guessing, should give you permission to do that and say, sure, dad, or sure, husband, you go do that.
Yeah, they're probably like, yay, he's finally gonna
Yeah,
mention his
yeah,
feelings.
yeah.
And do you
And if
recommend like
you
a lot
have
of times?
children,
Oh, sorry, I'm interrupting.
no, all good. And then so when you go and sit under the tree, just sit there and do an internal scan. Now, if you don't feel like you're feeling anything, you say, well, I'm just sitting here, I'm not feeling anything. That's okay. You don't need to try and pretend. If you're not feeling anything, just start giving it some language. Say, I'm feeling calm, or maybe I'm feeling numb, or maybe just start to give it some words. But if you can notice something in your body, any physical sensation anywhere, can you notice that your neck or shoulders are a bit tight? Can you
Mm,
notice that? Can you notice that there's a temperature in your head? Or can you notice any sensations in the intercostal muscles between your ribs? Or can you notice a tightening or a vibration in your tummy? Right? Just take your scan to your physical body, and then start to become curious about it. Don't try and change it, but just notice it. Because a lot of people, and men specifically, but people in general, are carrying stresses or physical manifestations of spoken emotions in our bodies. So the body, by doing a body scan, this can be a way for you to start to explore your emotional world and then start to give it some language. And then the last step of this, after the practice, after the 15 minutes under the tree, go back inside to a loved one, someone who cares, your partner or children, and say, hey, I just wanted to try and put into words how I'm feeling. So I'm not very good at this. I'm going to stumble over my words a little bit. It might be a bit awkward, but I'm just going to start practicing communicating how I'm feeling. And so right now I'm feeling a little bit anxious, say, right? And that's the practice. So you sit under the tree, you do a body scan, start to give it some words, and then go and share that with a loved one. That's the practice.
Yeah, that is very simple. And do you recommend for people that don't know the words for feelings to look at like a list of feelings, like a feelings wheel, or
Yeah.
like
Well, go and have a look at Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart.
yes, I love that book.
She made a whole encyclopedia of emotions.
Yes, exactly. Although I don't think she mentions all of them, but um,
No, no, but
I don't
she
know, like
mentions a lot, and I
50.
don't necessarily agree with everything in there. But yeah, just go and I mean, Google it. Ask ChatGPT. We've got it all right. It's all right at the tips of our fingers. I think that's important, and I think also ultimately it's important because it then um, can help us improve that most fundamental relationship, which is the relationship with self. And then the next most important relationship, which is that romantic relationship. And the quality of that relationship really um, informs our ability to go out into the big wide world and do whatever it is that we do out there. The quality of that relationship that you come home to every night, if that's humming, you can go out and continue to grow and evolve into your potential in the big wide world. But if you're coming home to a relationship that's not great, you can't be the best version of you out in the world.
Yeah, it takes a lot of your creative energy to just deal with the problems and the issues that you have between you. So then you have less available for your purpose.
Yeah. And
Um,
you carry that heaviness with you everywhere you go, even no matter how good we are at putting the masks on. I remember sitting in a room. I was a student in the room, and the teacher was up the front of the room. It was the Coaching Institute here in Australia. And at the time, I was in my previous marriage and very, very unhappy. The marriage had become quite toxic, but I hadn't given up yet. I still was trying to quote unquote fix the marriage. But anyway, the teacher at the front of the room said something that really triggered me. I got triggered by, and they said this, that the quality of that relationship at home is the most important one. And if you're not happy in your marriage, you can't be successful in life. And I got really triggered by that. I was like, that's not true. I can still be successful, even though my marriage isn't great and blah, 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 blah. And I got very defensive internally. I might have even put my hand up and expressed my, contestation to that. Anyway, now that I'm lucky enough to be in a beautifully conscious, wonderful relationship, I feel very, very lucky and blessed. I understand what that teacher was saying now, and it's true. It really is. So, quite often I work with leaders in a corporate setting, and when we get to know each other and they're really curious about exploring their potential as a leader, we end up talking about that relationship.
yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, so why don't we go over the principles of conscious communication? I mean, I know that you already said it's about um, making sure that the other person understood what you said and then caring about what they want and how they're feeling too, of course.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, let's like take an example, like what are the principles of conscious communication as opposed to just sort of talking at someone.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the principles I believe is to start with understanding why.
Hmm.
Why are we having this communication? Before going into it, if you can. If it's a piece of communication that you're intending on having in the future, it's not just something that has happened impromptu, or even if it is just happening in the moment organically, to be curious about why are we having this piece of communication right now. And I don't mean the surface level reason why, I mean the higher reason why. So let's take an example in a romantic relationship. Maybe your partner has done that thing that they do that they know upsets you, or you think they know that when they do that, it really upsets you, and they've done it again.
Hmm.
Here you are, and you're frustrated, or maybe you're more than frustrated. Maybe you're annoyed, or maybe you're even a bit more than annoyed. Maybe you're pissed off, you're angry, right? And you're thinking, I need to go and tell them again. right? Why? Why do you need to go and communicate with them that you're angry? Well, because I want them to know that that thing that they did makes me angry and they've done it again. Why? Why do you want them to know that? Well, because I don't want them to do it again. Why do you not want them to do it again? Well, because then I wouldn't be angry. And why do you want to be not angry? Well, because then we can be in harmony together. Ah, why do you want to be in harmony? Well, because I love them. Ah, so now we're getting to the real reason why would I have this communication? Not because I want you to know I'm angry, because I love you and I would prefer to be in harmony with you. That's the why. And then I think it's a great place to lead into the conversation is by starting with the why.
Exactly.
Right?
Because
Hey,
if I
honey,
say I'm angry, they'll get defensive. But if you
yeah, you come up
why
and
they're
you've
bought
done that
in.
thing again, and blah, 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 and then here we are down on this level. And the reason that you wanted to communicate in the first place is not actually being achieved. But
Yep.
if I came to you and started with, um, hey, honey, I love you so much. And I really prefer it when we're in harmony together. And I'd love to talk about something. Is that okay with you? Get permission.
Yep.
Is now okay. Well, if you can get permission to have the conversation, it's like, yeah, it's like getting permission in anything, any part of interaction with each other. If you can get permission to have the conversation, you've got a way better chance of that communication happening, you know. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think starting with why. Yeah.
Right. Starting with why, and I agree to ask, is it a good time? Because if the person's in the middle of something else, then they don't have the bandwidth to take in that you're angry.
Yeah.
That's probably then they're not going to consciously receive that. So I
Yeah.
agree. It needs to be said when they're present. Uh,
Yeah.
and then I
Timing's really, really important.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
those
So
two
important.
principles, like the why, and then make sure it's a good time. And then I imagine it's really about like saying it in a way that is, um, that you've already processed it, that you're not like trying to make them wrong.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Owning it. Rather than saying you trigger me, saying when you do this, I get triggered. And I know that my triggers is my stuff to work on, and I'm in relationship with you, and I want to continue to try and get better at communicating with you because communication is the connection of our relationship, and I love you. So I'm communicating with you because I want to be in this with you. So I'm going to work on my triggers, and I just wanted to share with you, I still get triggered when you do that, just because I want you to know. It's funny, Talia is my partner. Talia and I, when we first got together, we built some fundamental tenements of our relationship. We both came out of 20-year marriages with two
Oh
kids
wow.
each. We're a
Yeah.
blended family. And we were really wanting to not make the same mistakes that we made in our previous relationships. So we spoke a lot about this stuff. And one of the things that we came up with is an acronym called JAYA, Jaya, just as you are. We
Mm.
vow to each other, I will love you just as you are,
Oh,
not as the potential version of you if you could only just get better at this bit, right?
right.
Just as you are. And what that means is that when I get triggered, I'm still loving you just as you are. You being you, you do you the way you are. I will work on my triggers and I'll communicate with you where I'm at and where I'm still getting triggered because I want you to know because I love you. If you want to then go and improve or evolve or grow in because of that information, that's up to you. I'm not that's there's no condition on that. And when two people both approach the relationship like this, it works. It really
Right.
does.
No, exactly. Because then if I'm your partner and you said that to me, and then, you asked me afterwards, like, what do you think about that? Then I would
Mm.
want to, work to change my behavior to accommodate you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, because you love the other person and you're like, oh, I don't want to, last thing I want to do is do something that causes you to be upset,
Right,
you know?
exactly. If you say it in a way that's not blaming them.
If you
Um,
say it in a way that's not blaming them so they don't get defensive. And this is another part around communication is that what gets in the way mainly is our sense of identity,
exactly.
aka ego. And our ego is necessarily defensive because it's a protection mechanism.
Mhm.
And so it's very, very defensive. And our ego defends our sense of identity, which is our ideology and our beliefs and the way we think things should be and the way we think we are or who we think we are. And so
Exactly.
when we feel attacked, we default into defensiveness. So if you can find a way to approach the communication, um, like you said, where the person doesn't feel attacked, then they don't feel the need to defend. Then we can start to communicate, which means seek to understand each other, you
Yes.
know.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think the way you said it was really key that when this happened, I felt triggered. And I know that's my trigger and it's my job to work on it. And at the same time, I want you to know that that behavior triggers me. And, then
Yeah,
ask, like, what do you think about that? Right. Which is, I
yeah,
imagine the next step is as
yeah,
nonviolent communication calls it, a connection request rather than an action request.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And checking in, that beautiful, simple, um, after you've finished communicating what you're hoping to be understood, asking them, hey, I'm just curious, what you heard me say. What have you heard just now? And key, when the other person, and this can be in the context at work, it can be in the context in community, wherever it is, when the other person shares back to you what they heard, and quite often they haven't quite heard it the way you meant it, then I think it's really helpful to own it and say, own the communication and say, that's not quite what I meant. Let me try again and communicate more effectively for you.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than saying, no, you haven't understood me, and that's your responsibility to understand me, take the responsibility and say, it's my responsibility to communicate in a way that you hear. So I'm going to try and share it in a different way. And you just gently backwards and forwards until the other person gets you and they say, I get you. And
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, I agree that this is really wonderful if we can master these tools. And I agree that our ego gets in the way. So it's like, I know that you talk a lot about having a mindfulness practice and why that's so important. So, you
yeah,
want to share more about that?
absolutely. It is ultimately important because the practice of mindfulness, whether it's integrated into doing that which we are ordinarily doing already anyway. You can mindfully brush your teeth. You can mindfully listen. You can mindfully drive your car. So that's integrated mindfulness. But I think more effective in terms of developing our abilities is the practice of dedicated mindfulness, which is meditation. And when we're practicing mindfulness, which is quite simply an observation of the present moment, observing anything that you can be aware of in your consciousness, whether it's sounds or sensations or even your thoughts. You can simply notice the thoughts that come and go. What we're doing is we're practicing uh, being as consciousness. It's just being conscious, just noticing. And our ego, our sense of identity, exists in our thoughts. I
Hmm.
think I think that, and I feel this, and I feel that, and a little. And so as we practice going to a place of observation and just noticing the ego and noticing anything that we can notice, we're practicing stepping outside of that defensiveness. We're being identified with the moment rather than I am angry, which is what we say in English, that we are noticing anger or noticing the thoughts or noticing the sense of identity. And as we get better at that, then we can integrate that into communication. And you might be in a conversation with someone and they say something and you get triggered. And rather than just being reactionary and queuing up and waiting to jump in and saying, no, that's not right, you can notice that all of that going on in your head, notice it and be non-attached and breathe, let it go, lean back in again, listen, seek to understand, you know, and then choose how to respond rather than just reacting from that place of defensiveness.
Right, exactly. Or I imagine, because I completely agree. I think mindfulness is incredibly important, and both me and my husband both meditate. Um,
Mm,
that, an alternative option is like that you just say, "Hold on, I just got really triggered. Can
yeah,
we take some deep breaths together and,
yeah,
center myself?"
yeah,
Um,
yeah, completely. And when you do that, um, when you ask for that pause and just to do some breathing, in the breathing part, do a mindfulness practice, which is just to notice. Just notice what thoughts are firing. Just notice what you're feeling. Notice your heart rate. Notice your temperature. Just do a little scan. And that is a mindfulness practice. And when you do that, then you kind of move beyond being stuck and identified with the state of being. You move a bit beyond that and allow it to just flow, and it naturally changes because that's the natural way of things, is everything's in a state of change. And it just changes, and you'll notice that you become a bit more calm, you know. And then if it's with your romantic partner, that you can just in silence and breath, just look into each other's eyes and
exactly. And that's
work together.
very very regulating to both of your nervous systems. It allows you to feel like you're on the same team, even if you were just
Yeah,
arguing.
yeah,
And, I mean, sometimes like my energy can get really intense when I'm triggered. And sometimes my husband, tells me, like, hey, wait a minute, I notice myself starting to get defensive. Um,
yeah,
you know, could you say it in a different way, please? Uh,
yeah.
and
Yeah, I love that. And you said this, and I just want to bring the attention to this practice because it's a beautiful practice. Breathing in time together.
mhm,
It's a really beautiful practice. Even when things are not escalated, even when you're just in a moment of everything's nice and beautiful, maybe you're in an embrace on the couch together. Just play around with matching your breathing with each other. It's a really
exactly.
beautiful tantric practice. Yeah.
It's surprising how much you feel connected just by that.
Yeah. Isn't
Like
it?
like when we do it, it's like I feel this, I can, I'm very energetically sensitive. It's like I can feel all this energy being exchanged between us just with the breath and
Yeah.
feeling all these connections being made energetically. And yeah, it's a really
Yeah.
cool practice. Um,
Yeah.
and I know that you probably get this all the time too. I have a lot of clients that say I've tried meditating, but it doesn't work for me. And I know that you've created a course as your free gift, um,
Yeah.
to make it easy, and I love that. And it's normally, I think, what, $59, but you're making it free
Yeah.
for anybody who is listening to this podcast. So, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. It's called Mindfulness Made Easy. It's an introductory course to mindfulness. There's there's written explanations that go with it, and then there's audio recordings, if you don't mind the sound of my voice and my Australian accent.
Oh, well,
But
I like
yeah,
it, and I'm sure anyone who's made it this far does too.
yeah. So you can download those recordings and keep them forever and use them. And I explore different variations of meditation. So there's a loving kindness meditation, there's a calming meditation, there's a thought observation meditation, there's different versions of the same thing. But my intention was to make it simple. It's not easy, you know. Being mindful isn't easy. I have clients, most of my clients say to me, "Oh, Jem, I can't meditate. I've got an especially busy brain." And I say to them, it's not especially busy. We all have busy brains. Those thoughts are always firing. I don't know if you've ever just sat on the couch in silence. I'm sure you have, but to your listener, if you've ever sat on the couch in silence and just observed this non-stop narration that's going on, right? And imagine that you could take that person out of your head and sit them on the couch next to you, and they just don't stop talking.
I
They
know.
just don't.
I
And
like
they're a
how
bit crazy.
The book that I forgot the author, but The Untethered Soul, he does a really good job of
Michael Singer.
describing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he's just like your roommate that's always living with you.
Yeah, that's right, and so, but even that non-stop narration, that non-stop dialogue, even that can be an object of your observation. You can simply notice it. And every 3 to 5 seconds, you'll notice that you've been carried away in the thinking again. You're lost in the thoughts again. That's okay. When you remember that you're lost in the thoughts, you just take a breath and you come back to the place of observation. The moment when you realize you're lost in thought and then come back to observation, that's the bicep curl. That's the
Exactly.
workout. That's
Yep.
the practice. I meditate every morning for 20 to 30 minutes each morning. And out of those 20 minutes of meditation, I'm probably only in a space of no thoughts or nothingness for an accumulation of maybe a minute or two.
Exactly.
The rest of the time, I'm remembering that I'm lost in thought and coming back again.
Right. But that's the practice, right? It's
That's
like people think the practice is when your mind is quiet, but that's not the practice. The practice, I love the way Sharon Salzberg talks about it, in her book, Real Happiness, right? It's the practice is learning how to catch yourself, not make yourself wrong that your mind
yeah,
wandered and begin again with
that's
a
right.
joyful attitude.
Yeah.
And that carries over with every mistake we make in life to not beat ourselves up and look at what we're learning and starting again, you
Yes,
know?
beginner's mind. And that's the part of the Buddhist teaching around mindfulness is that we come to every meditation with a beginner's mind.
Yep.
The minute you start to think I'm an expert, you're missing the point.
Exactly. Well, that's your
Yeah.
ego talking, and that's why you need more meditation when your ego says that. Because it's
Yeah.
like, oh, then now I'm feeling arrogant. I have to observe that, and where does that come from, and how is that going to help me?
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it is definitely never a dull moment once we explore our inner world. Um,
Yeah, how can you get bored? There is so much going on. And then there's even the visual field. When you close your eyes and sit and become aware of your visual field, it's not just pitch black nothingness. There's lights and movement um, and sometimes for some people images or for other people who are not so visual, not images, but there's certainly light and shade and movement. It's interesting and fascinating.
Sorry, my alarm went off, but uh, but but yeah, so I mean, I think that it's like really um important to have a mindfulness practice. I agree because that's what allows us to listen in order to understand rather than to have an agenda in our mind while we're listening to prove that we're right.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many other benefits that I've been experiencing with a long-term dedication to mindfulness meditation. Even, for example, an experience of pleasure, whether it's eating chocolate, say, for example, you know, that when you eat a piece of chocolate mindfully, the pleasure experience is multiplied,
Yep.
you know, rather than just tearing open the wrapper and shoving it in your mouth and going, yeah, I've got my chocolate, and then finishing it and then reaching for whatever. Even sipping water becomes a really pleasurable experience when you do it mindfully. And then obviously our ability to be present and listen in communication, but also we can regain so much time that we previously lost to being consumed by something not pleasant, something unpleasant, like frustration or anger or sadness or anxiety or any of these states that we get into that we don't enjoy being in. The practice of mindfulness, you really do develop your ability to allow that state to be in that moment, and it passes so quickly. So if you are angry about something and then the anger has served its natural functional purpose, so just say, for example, you needed to defend one of your children or something real, and anger is what fires you up to say, don't you dare do that to my child, whatever. Then the moment passes, and rather than staying angry for the rest of the day going, how dare that person speak to my child in that way, that you can, through a mindfulness practice, you can let it move on and dissipate and come back to your place of equilibrium, and it's like,
Exactly.
wow, I'm saving hours every single day that I used to be still caught up unnecessarily in pleasant states. And now I'm able to let them go and come back to a pleasant state of, oh, okay, here we are.
Exactly. And that is what creates the ability to then communicate in a conscious way with the rest of the people in our day rather than hold
Yeah.
on to the anger and then have that come out in your communication to the other
Yeah.
people. It had nothing to
Yep.
do with
Which
it.
then determines the quality of the rest of your day.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so I love that you're giving away your course for free. I looked at it. I think it's normally $59. So it's like
Hmm.
um it's a real generous gift that you're giving. So I will put the link below this video and to your course and there's a discount code. It's podcast 25 for free lifetime access to this course. And I think that it is, I completely agree that mindfulness is very important in order to, when we're triggered, to be able to say that we're triggered and to not get reactive and cause arguments and to be able to, when I'm angry, ask myself, what is the purpose of communicating that? It's to
Mm.
have a harmonious relationship and let me lead with that. Let me say that first. And
Yes.
is this a good time to talk about something important to me? And then say it in a conscious way where I'm taking ownership and I'm not blaming. If I'm not centered, then I can't do that. Then I'm just
Yeah.
going to react and be like, you did that. And then he'll be like, no, I didn't. Or what's the big deal? And then we'll be arguing. So I love the principles that you're teaching. They're very simple but like meditation, they're simple but not easy. But the more that we do mindfulness, the easier it is to be conscious in all aspects. So I love that that's what you're teaching.
Beautiful summary.
Yes, thank you. And so this has really been a pleasure, and I have tons of resources to share. I will put the link to your book, Conscious Communication. It is The Art of Conscious Communication is the title. I'll put the link to that below this. I will put the link to your TED Talk that you did this year in 2025, because you've done a few, I think, or at least a couple. I watched your other one. I didn't see that one, so I'll see that too. I'll put the link to that below, and I will put the link to your course below with the link to have the course for free, which is podcast 25 again, just so you have it top of mind. And yeah, any last thoughts that you want to share with our audience?
Um, yeah, you made it. You made it to exactly where you're supposed to be, apparently, because there you are, and to the precise version of yourself that you should be in this moment.
Hmm.
You made it. You shouldn't be more like anyone else, and you shouldn't be anywhere else, apparently, because there you are. And that's not where you'll be at some point in time in the future, and it's not the version of yourself that you'll be at some point in time in the future, but that's the future's the future, and it doesn't exist in this moment, and the past doesn't exist in this moment either. There is literally only this moment and this version of you in this moment. And so I just want to acknowledge you and say that you are beautiful just the way you are.
Oh, thank you so much. I just feel like that is definitely self-acceptance is the prerequisite to being able to accept other people. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
we treat other people the way we treat ourselves, I like to say.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, the
Yeah.
more conscious we are, the more conscious our relationships will be. And of course, these principles apply to communication at work, communication across the board, and society. And society needs that now more than ever. So,
Mm.
I commend you for doing this work, and I look forward to having this podcast reach as many people as it's meant to reach. And, may everybody have a conscious day filled with self love and self acceptance, then to be continued.